Well, good morning and welcome to this Esop Center webinar and discussion, I should emphasize, here with FS Club. I'm Michael Mainelli and I'm delighted to have with us today Joost Meyer dialing in from Dusseldorf and Amadeus, and Damien Carnell, whom all of you know. And today's importance is really to discuss what we're doing with employee share voting. Now, we can only do this thanks to the many sponsors who contribute to FS Club and the ESOP Center. And for that, we would like to thank you. But we're going to get right into the meat of things. Firstly, by covering the agenda. My job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible so that you can hear from our two experts. Damien is going to be introducing this concept of the employee voice. What is the role of employee shareholders and how should their voices be recorded? Should this be in a different fashion? Then Joost Meyer is going to give us a keynote address, really looking from the company viewpoint. And then we have approximately 20 minutes for questions and answers. And I would like to emphasize, we really would like a vibrant discussion. I'll be putting a couple of commentaries into the chat room. And in fact, Damien and Joost have organized 3 polls for you today, which we will be covering. So the 2 speakers are known to both of you. We've put their biographies into the website, and so I shan't waste time reiterating what you've read. What we'll do is we'd like to move straight on to the very first poll question, which I shall be launching now. And the question is a fairly straightforward one. Is it a good idea that employee share ownership votes should be separately counted and reported, provided it's practical? So do you out there think it's a good idea? Do you think, no, I don't think it's worthwhile? Or are you undecided? And that's probably the reason you came today, was to have a good discussion on it. Now, almost half the audience have now voted. Joost and Damien, you'd expect this audience to be pretty quick off the mark. And I'm just going to kind of give us an idea of what our opening poll is like. And I'm just about to share those results. And as you can see, well, 70% think it is a good idea, 14% don't think it's worthwhile, and 14% are undecided. So what we'll do now is I think we'd like to hand over, really, Damien. You've got that sort of opening gambit there with 70% for the idea. Over to you to introduce the concept in full.
Thank you, Michael. The concept of the employee voice over the last couple of years has really gone up the corporate agenda. Listening to employees and recognizing them as important business partners is part of the hot topic of ESG, and certainly in a number of places, including the UK, under our Section 172 directors under a duty to take account of the wider scene and the views of employees should form part of decision making. And if we go back to the early days of employee share ownership, when the idea of giving shares to employees was really quite radical, it was regarded as some kind of socialist ruse, some kind of quasi-communist and rather seditious kind of activity. The idea was that you would promote participative management, that you would not just give a capital interest to the employee and some kind of financial interest, but you'd also combine it with a little bit of respect for their viewpoints and provide things like financial information and not just about the dry and dusty suggestion box that in many companies simply have a button at the bottom and nothing else. It's much more an engagement feature. One of the mechanics here is to say, well, we know that employee ownership provides a vote. It does provide a way for employees to express their views on exactly the same questions that are being raised by the company for its shareholders to vote on. So the real reason we're seeing employees not really voting is they get swamped. So we can see in this slide here that a number of dimensions, helping companies rebuild, aligning employee interests, improving productivity, and all those good things to do with gain sharing and wealth creation. And it's not just about money. If we move on the slide a little bit. This is why sort of employees don't bother to vote. That in totality, their voting power for many big companies is rather tiny. So why bother to vote? That's actually what we see in practice. Statistics from Jost and maybe some of our other contributors will confirm. If we move one more slide, Juliet. So the idea is this, that if shareholders are voting on some regular resolutions, and it's coming out with, in many cases, overwhelming support by shareholders, but we know that employees are closer to the business than many shareholders are, and on certain of the votes, we might find that there is a divergence of the employee vote away from the shareholders would be voting for almost routinely. But because the employee vote is so small, we don't really detect that. So the proposal is that maybe we will intentionally separately, so that we will clock that, but otherwise completely lost the overall vote of 98% in this particular example. So let's move it on one more slide. So some of the potential advantages, as I'm sort of outlining them here, and let's be clear that we're not dying in addiction saying this is absolutely imperative, but one starts to wonder, why would you not do this? It does respect the employee owner status. It's not just a matter of giving them some value. I mean, if you pay them cash as a basic salary, that's giving them value. So share ownership goes a little bit beyond that. It allows a company to demonstrate that it is actively listening, that we will take the time and trouble to find out how the employees have voted and had a look at that, and then adds to the other tools that are available to the company, things like engagement surveys, some intranet type stuff, the in-house magazine, these other good things that are knocking around. This is not instead of those things, it goes alongside those things. And then it also allows you to benchmark. I mean, if we, in the earlier case where we see a 60% against, is that good or bad? I mean, how does, on that particular type of vote, how does that stack up against what other companies are experiencing? And what was the vote last year and the year before that? I mean, if it's always hovering in the sphere of 59, 60, 61, that's a fairly normal outcome. If normally it's 85% for the employees and suddenly it dips to 60%, why is that? What has suddenly happened that we ought to know about, which otherwise we would not know about? So a bit of benchmarking, both over time and against comparators in various ways, all of a sudden becomes possible when we've got new data. So if we move on one more. And here's the promise to the employees is that we will tell them in aggregate how the population voted. We will promise to report that to the board. The board itself will promise to the employees to say, A, that they have noted the result, but also that they are thinking about the implications of that result, and there may be resulting actions. And it may be that the board or the company wants to make that both the vote result and what the board makes of it and plans to do about it available to others, possibly shareholders, possibly others. And that's sort of the suggestion in round terms, and that's sort of to set the scene for a presentation by a real live company. I mean, I'm a theoretician here, but a real live company with real people who actually really go to work and really actually own real shares. There was one other little thing I should mention though, which is these votes arise automatically when employees actually own shares, because shares have votes. Employee share plans also include options, and options don't have votes and they don't have dividends. So if one wanted to round this process out, you could create a synthetic vote for option holders on some equivalent basis, whether it's share for share or on some other basis, perhaps a date for a discussion for another day. But options and shareholding and the employee outcome, trying to get a better handle on that's the topic for debate. Michael, back to you to introduce.
Well, indeed, Damien, thank you very much. And I won't stand in the way. There are contact details for Damien, which you can see here, and they'll be up on the website as well. But Joost, you are the real live company, as Damien says. So over to you. What are your thoughts, please?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Michael, and also for setting the scene, Damien. Before I move into what Amadeus is typically doing in terms of share ownership and how we sort of also manage collecting our employees' votes at the time of the AGM to get their views, let me quickly just introduce Amadeus to those that are possibly not that familiar with what we do. If you move on, Amadeus is a company, unlike other technology companies or most other technology companies. Amadeus focuses primarily and solely on the travel industry. We've been around for over 30 years. We became a listed company again in 2010, so we've been around as a listed company for the past 11.5 years or so. We are the market leader in the travel industry, in that tech space. In 2019 alone, we boarded more than 1.9 billion passengers. I mean, our systems helped airlines to board 1.9 billion passengers. And we are and have been recognized as one of the 10 leading worldwide technology companies since 2019 by Forbes. And if you move on, you see our global presence on the next slide. We are present in almost all jurisdictions and countries around the world. There are very few white spots around the globe where we don't have a presence and where we don't have a connection or business relationship with either an airline or an airport or a hotel chain or similar like that. And what we are particularly proud of is our team. We are now around 16,500 employees worldwide. We are a true leader in diversity. We have over 150 nationalities on our payrolls, and more than 60 languages are being spoken, which is also testimony to how diverse Amadeus is globally and how we address the needs of the travelers on a worldwide scale. When we move over to our customers, you can see that we service the whole array of the travel industry. That's travel agencies, that's airlines, airports and operators, ground handlers, it's hotels. Just this year, for instance, we have entered into a strategic looking forward deal with Marriott, the world's largest hotel chain, which gives us great pride in the hospitality space and is something where we have technology to offer in the hospitality space that is unique and no other tech company at this point in time can offer that, and we are very proud to be able to enter into this partnership with Marriott and go forward with them on that. And what you also see here, rail operators, mobility providers, some insurances. So the whole array of travel and hospitality is really under our belt. Just finally, to round off, since 2004, Amadeus has invested more than 8.3 billion euro in research. Obviously, is something that has hit the travel industry and also has hit Amadeus quite a bit. And as you can see on the final slide of this section, which, if you move on, please. Yeah. While we were growing and were growing strongly year on year over the past 10 years or so, obviously the pandemic the pandemic has had its toll. We are far from being back to the pre-COVID 2019 results, while we are seeing that activities are picking up. Not only, as I said, have we been able to enter into a strategic partnership with Marriott, we've also had the good fortune to get more airlines in the APAC region under our belt, and are also very successful in the Middle East with some of the airlines there, forging our strategic alliances with those partners. And hopefully, once we finally all over the world get this crisis and pandemic out of the way, Amadeus is well positioned to regain their strength and go back to, with our partners, to the growth trajectory that you can see was paramount until 2019. That much for Amadeus. If we now move over to our share plans, I would like quickly to highlight just the three main pillars on which our equity offerings are built and have been built for the past few years. We run a performance share plan. To Damien's earlier point, Amadeus doesn't run option plans, we just have share plans. What we provide to our employees and managers and leaders is actual Amadeus shares. We did the first offering of our performance share plan just after the IPO in 2010 and have more or less run this program in the same form and format since. This performance share plan is limited to the executives and top management of the company. Approximately 200 individuals, and the annual at grant value is around 7 to 8 million euro. And in the past, participants have been very, very fortunate in terms of getting great returns, both on the performance outcome after a 3-year vesting period, but also on the nice share price evolution, which obviously, as I've said before, due to COVID has come to a standstill and has not recovered fully. While we are hovering at around 60 euro per share and have done so for the past few months, this is luckily quite a far cry away from where it was at the lowest end in April and May 2020, when we were trading at 42, 43 euro a share, having come down from a 70 odd euro per share, but have not reached those 70 euros again. The second pillar that Amadeus is offering, and we have been overhauling that pillar and have adding to our recurrent share offering only this year. We're very proud that we've been able to do this despite the crisis, and that we've been expanding our recurrent equity offering also to the middle management, to a far larger group than we've had in the past. Since 2021, so this May, we have the first offering. Around 1,300 individuals are recurrently offered a restricted share. So no performance criteria. It's a flat grant with an accelerated vesting over a 3-year period, where 1/3 of the grant vests each year. And this is something that gives us great pride in terms of being able to do that despite the difficulty that the travel industry and Amadeus also is going through at the moment. This is complemented by another arm of restricted shares, where we make discretionary, highly discretionary awards to around 100 people on an annual basis, either as a recognition or retention tool, or in some cases also to onboard. The third pillar, which is the most important for us and possibly the one that gets the most attention in the company as a whole, is our Broadband share purchase plan, which has been around since 2013. We enjoy quite a good take-up. 40% typically of our employees, of the eligible employees, sign up each year. We have the plan up and running in more than 30 countries, and it's a plan that's been on offer since 2013. The maximum that an employee can save through the share purchase plan is 4,800 euro, and as we have a 50% matcher, they will receive 2,400 euro worth of shares after a 1-year holding period, if they're still with the company and have fully invested in the plan. And that one, as I said, is very, very successful, and has obviously expanded the employee ownership base of how many of our employees actually own shares quite significantly. And when we turn to the next slide, what does that mean to the voting pattern, and what does that mean to the way that Damien was describing in linking shareholders' votes and that of employees, and how we see this is coming together, and potentially is also something where we can link the two sides of that coin a bit better. On last count, we have over 8,600 employees that are share owners and that are that have a share plan account with our equity administrators, Global Shares. The Global Shares equity account will hold all sorts of shares that an individual might have. They might have some performance shares, they might also have some restricted shares, and they might also be participating in the broad-based share purchase plan that I was presenting earlier. Regardless of the share plan, all of that will be administered in their share plan account with Global Shares. We use the platform of Global Shares for a so-called online voting each year, and this is something where we address all our employees that have shares, vested shares, so with share owner and potentially dividend ownership and voting rights associated with it. We address all these employees on an annual basis. Typically in the early May timeframe, an email will go out to all our shareholders listed in Global Shares. Global Shares is managing that, and will invite them for a vote in the upcoming AGM to use their voting rights. And as you can see at the bottom, what we found in 2021 was that overall 76% of the overall share capital out there cast their vote in the resolutions. The resolutions generally were approved with an 80 to 90% for voting pattern, with one exception. The advisory vote on our remuneration report unfortunately got a majority of against votes on account of a number of decisions taken by the company and its board as a reaction to the COVID crisis, and using discretion, deviating from a formulaic approach to making variable payouts. And that is something that apparently we didn't manage to convey and communicate in such a convincing manner that investors were prepared to follow that line of thought. And if we move over to the employee vote, as Damien said in his pie chart earlier, it's only a small proportion of votes that actually come in this 76% from the employees. It's only 0.2%, but we are quite proud that this represents around a good quarter of the overall employee ownership of shares, which is not bad. We could be doing better, and potentially with some more and more intensive communication around the voice of the employee when it comes to company decisions and voting patterns, is something that we could potentially do a bit more on. But interestingly enough, there was, including the advisory vote on the director's remuneration report, all resolutions passed by our employee base with an 80 to 90% for voting. So not a single resolution fell sour in the eyes of our employee base. And I think that is also something that we can be quite proud of, in terms of having ensured that our employees were able to follow the line of thought that went into certain decisions that we made with the directors' remuneration in the wake of the 2020 COVID crisis to a better degree in terms of following that line of thought than generally the investor population have been able to do. And with that, I conclude and hand back to Michael and Damien, and obviously to the audience for any questions or any comments that you might have, or anything that you would like me to explore a bit further.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that, Jos. And I think you're absolutely right, Damien. It is so important to hear, and not just from the theoreticians, but from somebody at the cutting edge there, and a big company as well, which is useful. Right. Well, a couple of quick ones. Joost, in your opinion, and this is a question from Fred Hackworth, what do you think basically companies, well, what do you think people should be doing to encourage companies to push this idea of employee voting? What from a corporate perspective makes you want to do this?
I think what we've seen in this past year, with heightened attention on the voting pattern at the AGM, is a perfect storm that illustrates here is what you can do, and here is what is in it for you, and how you can voice your opinion and make it heard, either in a positive way, which fortunately for us was the case, or also voice when you feel you are a bit more critical than the investor community at large. So I think that kind of communicative approach is something that, as I've said before, we could explore further and potentially underpin the general email going out from our providers with a bit more bespoke communication efforts to hone in on the fact your vote counts, it is important, and please make sure that you go to the voting booth and that you make your voice heard.
David Craddock has put in a note, and may I also point out, people, please do use the GoToWebinar Q&A facility, and all these questions and comments will be sent to Damien and Joost. David Craddock says it's a great subject to address and long overdue for examination, and thank you, Damien and Joost, for your contribution. Employee voice is consistent with strengthening the infrastructure for the success of employee share ownership. What steps do you recommend for overcoming the nervousness at board level, particularly in the quoted sector, of encouraging votes for employees who are participants in the all-employee share scheme? We need to convince board members of the importance of engagement, and securing the support of the quoted sector is crucial. Damien, maybe I'll just turn to you quickly, the nervousness, and back to Joost.
There is some hesitation, I would have thought, in boards about what their employees might be saying to them through the voting outcome. And I think there's a couple of things to say about that. The first is just ignoring the fact that they're voting in that particular way, or that they could vote in that particular way, doesn't mean that the employees have stopped thinking bad things. It just means that you don't know that they're thinking bad things. You just suspect, but you don't know. So that's not really fixing a problem. You're only going to get to understand and diagnose the problem and get to some kind of therapeutic outcome if you face up to the facts and engage with the employees, even if it's an unpopular kind of outcome. And it is true, in the earlier examples in my slides, we were thinking about having, let's say, 98% in favour, maybe 60% in favour on the employee vote on certain things. And I suppose it's executive compensation or the director's remuneration vote, which might be particularly in point. And it's very interesting to me that in this particular case here, we've got it the other way around. We've got outside shareholders voting with their box ticking pens, basically saying we've got rules, and even though we understand that there's a global pandemic coming on and Amadeus is in the travel industry has been knocked sideways, we have to tick the against box, but the employees voted in favour. And a quick question for Joost. I mean, was that outcome noted at the board, Amadeus?
We did share it with them, and there were a few nods, but it wasn't something that created a lot of discussion. I think the main reason, just because of the magnitude in both accounts, I think what has created more awareness is internal tools that companies of our size and many others are using, aside from voting patterns, which is engagement surveys, and similar comments you regularly get from employees through various sorts of feedbacks, of which, as I've said, the engagement survey is probably the most prominent one. And quite incidentally, we were running just after the salary cycle finished in April this year in 2021. We were running a general engagement survey at Amadeus in the May timeframe, just before the AGM, and that saw quite a prominent rise in the overall engagement levels on all counts and all those questions, and ties in nicely with that overall voting pattern at the resolutions for the AGM, which came as a very supportive piece of information, both to our executive committee but also to the board, in terms of, yes, what we are doing and the decisions we've taken in terms of compensation, in terms of how to position ourselves as a company and as an employer. As I said, I mean, being very proud that we've been able to expand the recurrent equity offering to the middle management in 2021, for the first time now, offering this to 1,300 middle managers on a recurrent basis, is something that was very positively noted across the board in the company, and I think came at a very difficult but also at the right time to do it.
Okay, and another sensitive vote, which is upcoming and hardly ever seen at the moment, but will be in point over the next few years, and that's the so-called say on climate vote. A lot of institutional investors are calling for a say on climate, in other words, a vote on a company's transition plan as it goes into the program to get to net zero. And that kind of vote for employees is particularly germane, because the transition may involve very significant changes to the profile of the company, including possibly some plant closures or redundancies, for example.
Okay. We had a discussion back in October on this subject as well, and there were a couple of points, Joost, I'd just like to put you, if you don't mind. For example, if a responsible institutional investor decides that something in the round is right for the stakeholders, so let's take, for example, a merger, but the employees are against it, might the exposure of voting patterns reveal the conflict between the institutional investor and the employees, and disincentivize the institutional investor from voting for what they think is right?
Well, the institutional investor will tend to vote in the interest of the shareholders of the company generally. In fact, many of them are fiduciaries and are under a fiduciary duty to do exactly that. But to the extent that we have a wider duty within the board itself under section 172 to take into account fully the views of other populations, and under the Companies Act, employee impacts are expressly called out, it's important to pay attention to sources of information about that, I would say. I mean, but that is a case in point where the employee actual voting outcome is not going to make much difference to the overall outcome, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Joost, any thoughts on that yourself?
Yeah, I can only second what Damien has just said. And typically, when we have been in a situation in the past of pre-COVID again, where Amadeus has had made quite a few acquisitions in a number of years strategically to strengthen particularly our hospitality, but also our airport IT offering in the 2018-2019 timeframe. What we've seen and where we've been looking at and focusing more on, because I think the reaction is more immediate, is the broad-based share plan, because we've typically tried to offer that broad-based share purchase plan relatively quickly to acquired companies. And when we look at the participation rates there, what we see is, or what we are often seeing, is that particularly in year 1 or 2 of them being able to join the broad-based share purchase plan, the participation rate of these 4 just acquired companies is lower than the average that we are seeing, and also lower than what you see in terms of regional differences, with some Asia-Pacific countries being much more hesitant to join on cultural and other reasons than, for instance, what one would typically see in a European or even in an American space. So what we've been looking at is that kind of sentiment in terms of acquired or employees from acquired companies for a while sitting a bit on the fence, just watching how things are going to evolve. Is what the company has decided, or where it was decided to merge, is that really something that also benefits my mid to long-term career aspirations and my developmental aspirations to continue successfully in the company I would like to work for? And obviously that becomes much more important as we are getting out of this crisis, hopefully, as the war for talent, particularly in the tech space, is becoming more and more acute and is becoming a really hot topic for everyone in the tech.
Okay. We had another one. If we wish to promote employee engagement, perhaps soundings of employees should be taken earlier and more regularly ahead of something like a formal shareholder resolution. Otherwise, employees are either not part of the true process and overridden by institutional votes, or the firm engages employees, but then has a resolution they don't like, and then they vote against it, and that gives employees 2 bites at the cherry. So is this really the mechanism that should be used?
It's a reasonable question, and in the lead-in I was saying that the mechanics for this are not in substitution for anything else that you might want to be doing. And if during the course of the year there is a process of feedback and engagement and communication about the vote outcome and what you're going to do about it, or what you might want to do about it, and what the choices are, I think that's all conducive to some kind of annual cycle. So it's not just a one-touch event. It's not just an AGM vote and that's it, see you next year. It is part of an ongoing process, is what I imagined.
Yeah, and that ties into what I said earlier when I was sort of making the reference to Amadeus running a general engagement survey for all their employee workforce in May, incidentally just about 6-7 weeks ahead of the AGM, but that timing was just incidental. It was not really something that was conceptually important. And running such engagement surveys on a regular basis for pockets of the employee base, just to gauge where the employee sentiment is sitting, and that can be something that attracts internal attention, and is also something that will be fed back to boards and executive committee members to get a feel of where the company sentiment and where the employee base is sitting.
Now we've got 2 more polls, and I'm going to launch the second poll. This basically just to see how the audience feels, having listened to some of this. But while they're responding, David Craddock makes a point, Joost and Damien. How do you envisage employees getting their concerns on the shareholder meeting agenda for such voting? Any comments on that?
At the moment, they have an absolute right to vote on the proposals that are being put to the AGM. A number of jurisdictions do have mechanics to allow shareholders to lobby to have particular things put to a shareholder vote. We do know that the Children's Fund has specifically said that they are lobbying a number of companies. What they've actually said is actually hundreds of companies to have say on climate votes in most developed nations around the world for 2022. So having a mechanic that allows employees to propose resolutions as well, I think a number of jurisdictions have a percentage limit so that you can't have frivolous ones. So if there were to be changes to company law to allow that to happen, that's one thing. Or there's nothing to stop a company actually voluntarily saying, we will consider and put to a vote those items that we think are sensibly raised by our employees, and that we're not mandated to do it, but if it sounds like a good idea, we will seriously consider and actually do it.
Okay. Well, just before turning back to Joost for any thoughts, you'll notice here that you've got everybody off the fence, both of you, shifting them into both other camps with a straightforward 3/4, 1/4 split, with 3/4 for this as a good idea. Anyway, Joost, your thoughts?
I mean, this is encouraging in terms of having set the scene for getting that, but I think in summary, getting employees to vote on their shares for the AGM resolutions is certainly something that is important and potentially getting more prominence. If we look ahead, at the same time, I think it is important that the company has processes and internal mechanisms in place that allow it to actually gauge the employee-based temperature from time to time through engagement surveys or other means, just to be able to react potentially a little bit quicker than on a once in a year voting pattern, as important as that might be.
Well, I'm just about to close our last poll, so folks, please do have a quick look there. Given the debate today, should this separate employee vote concept be shelved or explored further, or should we just implement it and see what happens? It's a good idea. Just waiting for a couple more people to vote. That's great. We're back up. Everybody has voted again. Well, this is a fairly overwhelming one. If you remember that 25% weren't sure it was a good idea, but half of those still think it ought to be explored further. 38% feel we should implement it and see. So I think, Joost and Damien, you've got very strong support for pushing this debate a little bit further. And I would like to thank both of you today for raising these issues. Is there anything else either of you would like to say in conclusion? Damien, you first.
A quick thank you to you, Michael, and Juliet and the Centre for their support in sort of getting this sort of thought debate underway. And a thank you to Jost as well. And a quick question, Jost, do you feed back to the employees those percentages of votes and the percentages results by resolution to the employees? You said you did it to the board, but I was wondering whether you feed it back actually to the employees.
As a matter of fact, we did not, but it's something that certainly would be worth thinking about and exploring in terms of including, as I said before, in potentially a more bespoke communication campaign to the 2022 AGM going forward.
We've just run out of time there, folks. But I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone for their time today and for contributing to the various polls. And I think it is definitely something we're going to keep pushing here at Esop Centre as a point for discussion. So I'd like to thank Joost Deilingen as our guest from Düsseldorf, Damien for organizing this and setting it up, and Juliet in the background for running things. And please do look on the website for further information, our various bulletins which you can subscribe to, and obviously Newspad compiled by the ever interesting Fred Hackworth. So, and I'll use this as an opportunity as well to say with all best wishes of the season, and hope to see you next year at a few more of these discussions. Take care, everyone.
Bye.